Good morning. So Pastor Brian's away. Every year he does a softball missions raising event, and I think last year, I don't remember the exact numbers, but through this tournament they raised somewhere in the high 20,000s, if not more. I can't remember the number, but anyway, this has been a part of his life and his ministry for many, many years, and he gets to spend the weekend with his son Zach as well. So anyway, you got me for today, and I'm glad to be here. We're on our second of our series, Defiant, and standing strong in a world that appears as though they are against us and against our value system. The idea here this morning, and the title of this message is Breaking the Mold of What the World Thinks About Christians. The idea this morning is to help us to recognize what we look like to the outside world, what we sound like, and so forth. In 2 Corinthians, Paul says that we are ambassadors, right? An ambassador is somebody that represents somebody else, whether it's a nation or a person. And maybe you're here this morning and you came to know Jesus later on in your life. And so I want to begin by asking just a real simple question is there ever been a time in your life where you had some preconceived ideas about Christianity in general? I didn't come to the Lord until I was 26 years old. I was raised in a church a little different from a Protestant church. And I remember thinking when I turned 18, I was so ready to leave that religious stuff behind. And for a period of about 7 years, I questioned everything about Christians and Christianity and God and the Bible, as do many people. And maybe even now you are keenly aware that the culture around us overwhelmingly has a negative view of God, and it's often because of Christians, or more directly how Christians act. And so today really is about kind of taking this inward look at ourselves and say, and trying to identify, when people see me, do they see Christ in me? Many, many years ago, some of you will recognize the name Mahatma Gandhi. He was interviewed concerning his view of God. And not only was he a well-known guru of his day, but many of his thoughts and teachings still live on in American culture now. And in his interview, he said this: "I like your Christ, but I don't like your Christians. They are so not like Christ." And while that statement may not be true about every Christian, the prevailing view of Christianity to the outside world is the same as it was for Mahatma Gandhi. Well, fast forward to 10 years ago in 2014, a pastor by the name of James Emery White wrote a book titled The Rise of the Nuns. The Rise of the Nuns, N-O-N-E-S. And he pastored a church. It was a growing church, but about 80% of his church was made up of people that the 20% had gone out and reached. They were unchurched people. But what he found to be true was that most churches are not great at loving people where they are. So anytime a pastor recognizes any kind of church growth, it really is revolving church growth, because somebody else left their church to come to our church, and somebody left our church to go to somebody else's church. And that's not church growth at all. That's not the commission that Jesus left for us. And so in this book, James White says that the fastest growing group in the nation are the rise of the nuns, and those are those that have no longer affiliated themselves with any religious doctrine. They just don't believe anymore. And so in his book and throughout some other studies, there are a number of contributing factors that I want to share with you. True or not, the things that I'm going to share with you are really kind of congruent across many different kind of studies that you can find anywhere out there, but some things that the world says about you and I, okay? And I'm trying to help us to sort of look at ourselves again and say, am I a part of the problem or am I a part of the solution? Do I look like Jesus, or do I look like some kind of fanatic or some kind of person who has distanced themselves from the rest of the world? So here are 7 things that the world says about us. Number 1, we are too political. That doesn't mean anything other than if that's what they see, then maybe there's something we got to look at about that to say, well, why do we look political to an outside world? What is it about it? Number 2, we're homophobic. Number 3, the church always wants your money. I've heard that so many times. Number 4, we are judgmental. Number 5, we are full of hypocrites. Number 6, too much immorality in the church. And number 7, we are known to be against more things than we are for. And maybe you can relate to some of those things. Maybe you've experienced some of those things. Maybe you've been a part of some of those things in a public setting. But when you look at and evaluate the life of Jesus, Jesus demonstrated an unwavering love for people where they were at, not where he wanted them to be at, but where they were at. He loved people regardless of who they were. And so the message this morning, breaking the mold of what the world thinks about Christians, is really kind of that introspective look at my own heart. And same thing for me is, are there things that I say that might be push somebody away from my Jesus, right? The God that I love. I remember when I first moved to the Fredericksburg area. I won't bore you with all the details, but I landed at a church here locally that I did not want to go to. God made me go to it, long story. And about 6 months in, I wasn't crazy about the pastor. I wasn't crazy about the worship. Really wasn't crazy about the church other than people were friendly, and that was about it. And I happened to be going, I was in a store in the mall, and I heard a bunch of commotion happening around a cash register. You could tell there was something really heated going on. And so I kind of looked, you get curious, you're looking around. It happened to be my pastor of that church, and I shouldn't even use the words my pastor because I didn't see him as my pastor. He was the guy that was up here at the church that I attended at the time, cussing out the person behind the register. Well, guess what? I'm not inviting anybody to my church. Come to find out, he really did have a major anger problem, and it wasn't that many months later he resigned from his position at the pulpit, and then I heard other things about his life after he left the church. But everything that we do, if I am an ambassador for Christ, not only am I representing Christ, but I'm also representing you. So if you go somewhere and you're trying to witness to somebody and evangelize, or just say, hey man, if you're not going anywhere to church, I would love you to come to Riverside, and in that conversation you happen to mention the name Steve Weber, and that person had a bad reaction to Steve Weber in the past, guess what? They ain't coming to your church. So what does it look like for us in this world that is anti-church, anti-Christian, anti-Christianity? Well, let's start with John chapter 15, because there is a truth that came from the mouth of Jesus, and this is this, okay? John chapter 15, verse 18, and it says, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. And I told you I was 26 years old when I came to the Lord. I identified with everybody. I got along with everybody. There was no religious separation there. There was nothing that would divide us. And it really wasn't until my morality started changing, my ethics started changing, that I realized that there were people that I didn't identify with anymore, and they didn't identify with me. And so Jesus is saying, if you belong to the world, you would love the world as it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. So right out of the gate, we as Christians are at a disadvantage if we really love Jesus. Right out of the gate, we're at a disadvantage. Because if the world hated Jesus then, they're going to hate us now. And so that gives you a baseline, right? That gives you a place to start. Okay, so the world doesn't like me already because I identify as Christian. Okay, so what must I do to demonstrate the love of Christ in a world that is against religion in general, the rising of the nuns, as I shared earlier? And so I want to spend some time now differentiating between two different groups of Christians, if you will. The first one we're going to call the followers. If you are a follower of Jesus, you're not a threat to the world. And here's the reason why, and you'll see what the difference is in just a second. But if you are just a follower, generally we are somewhat complacent in our theology. Church is a part of our week, but it's not super important in the scheme of life. I was raised in a home that went to church every Sunday, and every Monday through Saturday, we did not live as though we went to church on Sunday. We're followers. And then there are disciples. And a disciple is a person that completely adheres to the teachings of someone else, or a theology, or something that they lived out their lives. And so a disciple of Jesus is somebody that reflects Jesus. We look like Jesus. We sound like Jesus. Or we have the character of Jesus. We have the lifestyle. Our speech edifies God, and our mannerisms, how we talk, how we think, how we act, how we love, how we demonstrate is different when you are a disciple rather than when you are a follower. So there's some things that I want to kind of pull out here, that some of the differences between the two. Number one, a follower agrees with the teachings of the Bible, but they're not really fully committed to it, whereas a disciple is all in. A disciple says, where you go, I'll go. A disciple says, I will follow you no matter what the cost. That's a disciple. Number two, a follower will go part of the way with the teacher until they face some kind of persecution, and then they back off. Whereas the disciple will acknowledge the one that they follow, no matter the cost. You think about all the people that we read about in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that came to Jesus and said, I'll follow you, I'll follow you, I'll follow you. And over again, what did Jesus do? He said, well, foxes have holes and birds have nests, but the man of God has no place to lay his head, right? And it drove people away from him. But he was trying to help us look at who we are as Christians. Number three, a follower blends in with the world pretty easily. I've been around my fair share of Christians that in all reality, I don't know really where they stood at as believers. Their speech didn't really edify God. Their actions didn't really edify God. I knew they went to church, and I know that in some ways they read their Bibles and things of that nature, but they just kind of blend in with the world. So if they're in with one particular group of people, they act like that group of people, and if they're with another group of people, they might carry on like that group of people. And then when they're with their church folk friends, they act like that. They're different. There's a difference there. They're followers. But a disciple sticks out like a sore thumb because they're making an impact in the world. And here's the reality. I believe that the world is looking more at followers than they are at disciples. I really think that's true. I don't think they're looking at you and I who are loving people unconditionally and caring about people unconditionally. They're looking at the followers that say that they follow but are doing many other things. And they're the ones that are coming out. Let me just share a quick story with you from my past. About 5 years ago, a guy shows up. I was a pastor at Freedom Church here locally at the time. It's since closed, but this guy shows up in my church, and at the beginning of the service, he grabs me and he says, "Hey, Pastor, can I meet with you after the service?" And I said, "Well, I can meet with you for a short period of time, but I have some plans." So he comes into my office after the service was over with. He introduces himself, and you guys can look this up for yourselves. He introduces himself. His name was Ken Stern. At one point in time, he was the COO of NPR Radio. Anybody know about NPR Radio? About as liberal as it comes, right? Everything about it is anti what we believe and identify with. And he was writing a book titled Republican Like Me, stark Democrat, grew up, it was either Arlington or Alexandria, I can't remember, but all he ever surrounded him with, his wife worked for the Democratic National Committee, like his whole world had been steeped in a world that said that you and I were bad people. And so he decided, he quit NPR radio, and he decided to write a book. He is a journalist. He's written lots of things in lots of magazines. And so he wanted to interview me on all the hot button topics, some of which I've already shared with you this morning. And I said, well, let's set up another meeting. Let's talk. And so we met, and he asked me all kinds of questions about the things that are really controversial, if you will, in the world today. And we got to the end of that meeting. He said, "Pastor Steve, I'm just telling you, man, you did not say or do anything that I expected. You didn't do anything. Like you didn't bash this group of people. You didn't make this group of people seem lesser. So, can I meet with some of the people in your congregation?" I said, "Absolutely." So, we set up a meeting. I had about 12 to 14 people in this room. And I didn't tell them why I had gathered them together. I just said, I would like you to come together for a meeting. I brought Ken Stern into the room. I said, "This is Mr. Stern. He's writing a book, and he has some questions he would like to ask you guys." I didn't want to prompt him. I didn't want to do anything. We get through about an hour of question asking and answering, and everybody in that room answered the questions like I did. And so we went out for lunch later on. He said, "I'm just telling you, I'm dumbfounded by what I'm experiencing here, because everything that you guys are saying really sounds like the Jesus that I think is in the Bible, but it's not what I came to understand." And he went on, and you can read his book. It's kind of cool. Just a little plug. Freedom Church is in there because we made his book. But he went on a hunt with the gun control people, NRA. And he said they were awesome. And he went to Liberty University, and he met with some of the higher-ups at Liberty University. He said, "Those people were great." He said, "Everything I've ever heard about you guys is wrong." And so it's made me kind of look back at my life as well and just say, man, what does it look like to be a Christian that looks like Jesus? So let me share with you some things that are biblical about what it looks like to be like Jesus, okay? So, and we're going to hit some of those hot button topics. So, rather than passing judgment, Christians seek to get to the heart of somebody else's issues, somebody else's lifestyle. Let me give you some examples. Rather than judging the man that wants to dress like a woman, get into their life and ask them questions. Find out why they led to that. I had a Bible study with a group of men years and years ago, and one of the guys in my group was a big, burly cowboy. Cowboy hat, cowboy boots, big bushy beard, dressed in flannel and jeans every time I saw him. We were having a Bible study one day. Afterwards, he calls me over and he says, "Pastor, I need to talk to you. And I'm just going to be honest with you, okay? Just want you to hear it." He said, "You said something that hurt me." I was like, "Okay, tell me more." He said, "I grew up in a home where my mom, I was the only guy, my mom, my grandma used to dress me up in women's clothes. He said, Pastor Steve, even to this day, I struggle with this. He said, you said something that kind of hurt me. And I said, Bud, I had no intention of doing that, and I'm so thankful that you shared that with me. And we worked through it, and we talked it out, and he stayed in my Bible study group, and we remained friends all the way through. But it just reminded me that even my speech in every setting matters, because you don't know where somebody else has been. You don't know what they've gone through. So what about the homosexual that makes you feel uncomfortable because you're so anti-gay? Folks, let me just say that rather than being offended by that, listen, it's uncomfortable. I get a little queasy when I see stuff. But what if rather than being judgmental about the situation, you show compassion? Let them see Jesus, not your opinions about their lifestyle. Let them see Jesus. You guys know that some of you know that I ran a homeless ministry here in Fredericksburg for 6 years. It took me 2 years before finally people started confiding in me and telling me stuff. And I'm telling you that over the course of that time, I met so many homeless people in the Fredericksburg community that were homeless not because it was a choice. As a matter of fact, for most all of them, it was not a choice. Some was mental health, but some of them were because of life situations, things that had happened, caused a train wreck of situations, and they wound up on the streets. They don't want to be there any more than you want to give them money necessarily. So rather than being judgmental every time we pass a corner where somebody's out there, what if we got involved in Micah Ministries so we could hear their stories? You know what you're going to hear? Because I've heard these stories. You're going to hear the stories of dads and moms and brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and grandparents who fell on hard times and had no way to get back up again. They just were looking for somebody that would listen and care about them where they were. I would say after 6 years of ministry, there was only 2 people whose lives were changed because of the ministry that we did. That means there were hundreds and hundreds that weren't. But out of the 2, their lives were changed forever. So you say, man, is it worth the investment? Yes. Didn't Jesus say, I leave the 99 to go after the one? That's what he would do. That's what we are called to do. Here's another one, and I've seen this happen many times throughout my ministry, and I'm not putting people in a category of being old or young necessarily, but being judgmental of how young people look and how they dress. Right? The young man that wears his pants halfway down, I don't get it either. I don't. But there's a human being behind those drop pants. There's a human being behind that teenager that is staring at their phone while you're trying to have a conversation with them, and all the time you're getting offended because they're not making eye contact with you. Earn their trust, earn their respect, get into their lives, give them an opportunity to share and speak. A disciple takes the hand of the prostitute and says, I care about you. A disciple doesn't judge the drug addict. They get involved in Zoe Freedom Center. So I'm going to be a part of the difference of helping you out of that world that you're living in. A disciple doesn't walk on the other side of the street when they see a modern day leper. They come alongside that person and get them some help. One of the first times God woke me up to this was a guy who, a friend of mine invited him to come over to my house, and this guy was total goth. He had the big spikes, all colored tips. He had the chains on him and the knives around him and the black boots. And I'm like, this dude is so scary. And as I started talking to this guy, I'm like, this is one of the nicest guys I've ever met. It was a persona that was on the outside, but we can't get to the inside until we're willing to walk to the other side of the street and grab the hand of a person who's living in a situation or appears as though they're in a place where they're struggling. You got to get there. This past Tuesday night, we had a pizza delivery guy show up. He had nose rings. He had tattoos all over him. He had a haircut. it was like, this guy's a tough-looking dude. And he brings the pizzas in, he sets them on the table. He says, so what are you guys doing with all these pizzas? And I said, well, I'm youth pastor. We're having an activity night here at our church. He said, praise God. He said, I've got a story, and Tony Harris was standing right beside me. Tony and I are both former drug addicts and all kinds of stuff. He says, I got a story about my past, but can I tell you that God set me free? I'm going to Life Point College because I want to be a pastor. And you know who made the first move that night? It was him. His name is Ray. And he said, can we gather together and hold hands? I want to pray for you. Like, this is a guy that is tatted up with nose rings, who looks nothing like the part of a perfect Christian, leading us in prayer out here in the hallway. Here's what a disciple of Jesus looks like. I'm going to go on. They're unashamed and unafraid to love others that are living in sin. I was bound by sin most of my life until I came to Jesus, bound by sin. I'm so thankful for the person that invited me to church. A disciple is the first on the scene and not the last. They stand up when others are standing down. A disciple of Jesus loves people where they are, not where they'd like them to be. They are unafraid of getting dirty. They are wise as serpents, but gentle as doves. A disciple of Jesus has weighed the cost and felt like it was worth giving God everything that they've got. And they may not ever get on the most popular Christian list in their church, but they know there's a crown of righteousness waiting for them in heaven. So I want to look at 3 stories, and we're going to do this kind of quickly here. I may not even get through all of them. But in Acts chapter 3, 1 through 7, we see the story of Peter and John on their way to a prayer meeting. They're going to church on a Sunday morning. And they go through the temple gates, and there is this person who has been lame from birth. And it could have been easy for Peter and John to do what's easy for us. They could have reached into their wallet, grabbed a couple of bucks out, said, here you go, buddy, hope things are well today, and gone on to church. Well, it might not be popular, and Pastor Brian might fire me, but I'm just going to tell you, if a ministry opportunity happens on your way to church, I'm pretty sure we're going to give you the green light to say, take care of that ministry, and if you get to church, you get to church, but love somebody where they're at. And if it's an interruption, maybe it's an interruption that God provided for you. You want to be defiant in the kingdom of this world? Go to that lame person. Go to that person who is struggling. And rather than giving them the thing that's super easy, why don't you walk up to them with a faith that believes that God can do anything in that person's life? You never know who might get saved and come to Jesus because you took time to stop what you were doing and minister to them. Get defiant in your culture. Get outside of your comfort zone. Second place, Acts 16 through 40. Again, we're not going to have time to go into the story, but here is Paul. He's ministering to people. A girl shows up, and she's prophesying. This is a man of God, but it's an irritant. Paul recognizes it as a demonic attack on this girl's life. He goes around. He prays over her. The demon leaves, and the owners of the girl all of a sudden get really angry, and so they call this mob together. They beat up Paul and I believe it was Silas. They're beating them up. They get cast into jail. They're put under lock and stock, under heavy security for delivering this girl of a demonic entity. And while they're in there, and they begin to worship. A follower would say, God, why am I here? Why did you put me in this position? But a disciple says, God, I'm here, and I still love you, and I still worship you, and I still give you glory, and I'm so thankful for that girl who is no longer bound by the enemy. And you know what happens next? God opens the gates, people get saved, the jailer, his whole family gets saved. Like, God does this great work. Why? Because Paul and Silas were defiant. They went against the cultural norms, the church norms, if you will. When did we stop worshiping God through the hard stuff so that the world can see that God is still good? Rather than walking away from church, because so many people do this, well, I got offended, I got hurt, something bad happened. No, worship Him. We sung about that this morning. Worship. Let people see that defiant spirit in you says, I'm not going to allow this situation to bring me down. And then I'm going to invite the worship team to come on up as we close out. In Acts chapter 10 is another one, guys, and I need you to hear this. This is so important. We're living in a culture, whether you like it or not, we have immigration all over the place. We have people from all over the world living right here in Fredericksburg. And in Acts chapter 10, verse 9 through 16, God breaks through a pattern in the Jewish community that had held them back from being able to evangelize to anybody else by giving Peter a vision of a sheet that came down with all these animals in it. Peter was like, what are you talking about? I don't even understand this whole thing. And God says, you're going to reach the nations, you're going to reach the Gentiles with the good news of Jesus Christ. And we would say that this would be a modern day breach in customary Christianity in order to reach Muslims. How many of you have ever reached a Muslim? Probably most of us have never even thought about, how do I share Jesus with a Muslim? Or what about the Hindu man that wears the bindi over their heads to cover their heads as a religious sign of their relationship with their God? You ever shared Christ with somebody that wore a bindi or had a dot on their forehead or dressed differently than you? They wore the robes because it's their traditions. I am sure that God has not changed and that He still loves the whole world. And that what Jesus gave up His life for? Not just you and me, but the whole world. So this morning, my question is this: what are you and I doing to break the mold of what the world thinks about Christians? When people see you, do they see Christ? Let us be defiant, not by shaking our fists in the air at everything that we're opposed against, but by taking on the Jesus model of loving people where they are at. So this morning, I am sending you out as missionaries. When you pull off of this property, you are entering the mission field. Let's go out and be ambassadors for Christ. And if you're here today and you're like, I don't know where I stand with Jesus, I would love to pray with you. If you want to return to God because you've been running, and this is the time. I want to tell you about the Jesus that I know that loves you in the middle of where you're at. So I'm going to invite you this morning to stand with us as we close in worship. Let's just take these next few minutes and say, God, if there's anything inside of me that needs to change, would you pray that prayer this morning? Would you be bold enough this morning to say, God, if I'm a part of the problem, forgive me. God, I don't want to be a follower anymore. I want to be a disciple. I want to give you everything that I've got. When people see me, God, I don't want them to see this hypocrite. I don't want to see them to see a judgmental Christian. I don't want them to see somebody that's homophobic or disconnected from them. Lord, I pray that I would leave this place today, go into the mission field of Fredericksburg area here, and shine the light of Jesus. In your name we pray. Amen.
Good morning, Riverside. It's time for our announcements. Are you
looking for a place to serve at Riverside? We are always looking for volunteers. If you have a heart for kids and River Kids, come see me every Sunday morning at the River Kids desk. If you don't feel that you're called to help the kids, we have other ministries that you can serve in. Just reach out to Jess or Ashley in the office and they will get you connected to the right person.
Riverside swag is now available. You can get it customized however you'd like. You can get things on your sleeve. I got a verse on my back. You can check the website out on our newsletter. It will be on the bulletin, and you can also check it out on the website.
Hey guys, if you haven't gotten the Riverside app yet, you need to do that today. Go to the App Store and download it on your phone. It's the one-stop shop for all things Riverside. You can give, you can sign up for events, all kinds of things. See our calendar, so go ahead and do that today.
Mark your calendars for September 7th when we're hosting a special prior screening for The Forge at the Regal Movie Theater. This is a fantastic opportunity for our church community to come together for an evening of inspiration and fellowship. Don't miss out on this exciting event. Bring your friends, enjoy a great film, and share this experience with your church family. We can't wait to see you there.